Hello and welcome. I'm BJ Arnett and my guest today is Colony Hughes. I want to get right to this because it's a subject that is important to me personally. I know a lot of you know that I teach on the college level and I have a wonderful group of students. And over the years, I've taught over 30 years now. And over the years, I've met some young people that have gone through some things. And Colony has a story to tell us, and I'm just going to let her give her testimony of where she is now versus where she was years ago. This is a kind of tough story.
Yeah, I'd love to share it with you. When I was a child, I dealt with a lot of rejection and I guess you would call it negative thoughts. I thought about suicide a lot. I would hear this constant, threats and loud voices in my mind. I hate you, you're worthless, you're never gonna be anything. And I dealt with a lot of anger. My family did not know what to do with me. At a young age, I would say 12 and 13, I started running away. I didn't really know what I was running from. Trying to run for myself, I guess, but I was always there. And, sometimes different states away, they would have to find me. And they couldn't figure out, I didn't know why I was so angry. And I, like everybody else that starts drinking and smoking pot. And I did that for a couple years. But it wasn't shortly after until I tried crystal meth that I thought, this is what I'm made for.
Wow, wow. So you can relate to the young people, and gosh, people think that this is just a situation that young people are going through, but people over the age of 30 are going through all of this connection and attachment to pharmaceutical drugs and drugs from the street and drugs and liquor and everything else that pulls us away from who we really are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had an identity crisis. I could never fit into any social group. I tried. I never could feel comfortable in my own skin, very insecure. And when I tried methamphetamines, that took all that away.
What did it? What was it about the methamphetamines that, did the voices in your head stop? Or did they say something different?
They ceased at first. It was a euphoric feeling. It was a numbing agent. I didn't feel any pain, and I was totally just self-absorbed, and I loved it, and I loved the way it made me feel. And at that point, my parents did not know what to do. Here I was addicted to crystal meth, and I was not going to stop. I was in juvenile detention centers most of my childhood. I think I went to a boot camp. Actually, I did go to a boot camp for several months, and then even a mental institution at one time. And all that did was increase my anger and my hatred.
So when you got out, you just went back to the same behavior?
Yeah, I couldn't wait. I knew as soon as I got out, I was going to go back and do the exact same thing.
So, there are parents who are watching this right now who have loved ones who are going through this. But there are also parents who believe that their children would never go through this, that they'd never hear voices in their head, that they'd never have these kinds of insecurities that cause them to move in this fashion. What do you think really happened inside of you that made this occur?
Right, you're exactly right. Like what you're saying about families never see their children doing that. My grandfather was a pastor. I had good parents. They weren't perfect, but they did the best they could like everybody else. And I really think that, divorce is common, so we don't think about it having trauma for a child. But that's one of my first memories is my parents separating.
Wow.
And I think that really started that, seed of anger, and then it just developed over time. Shortly after that, my mom remarried. I have 3 new brothers. I moved from year to year. We moved to a different place, and I just could never connect. And I didn't know that's why I was angry, but I think that's where it really started. And I continued my drug use very heavily. And, anybody that uses drugs on that intensity, for me, I loved it so much. If I passed out for 3 days and almost died and came back, that was a good high.
Wow. So you never had the understanding that this was killing you. It's like a slow death.
I didn't care.
Because it was better than the reality.
I would always say stuff like, why do you care what I do to myself? It's my body,
Right.
What does it matter to you? I was completely selfish and self-absorbed. I didn't care about anybody but myself.
So what caused the change? What happened in your life that made that shift?
It took a while, for that to shift. I'm definitely going to tell families it was prayer, but it took a while for that to shift. When I was 17, I think I, was raped. And when I found out that I was pregnant, I just thought, who's going to believe me? Because, at this point, I'm a liar and a manipulator. So I thought, nobody's going to believe me. And
you
I
had
think
lived this way for so long in front of people.
already,
already
I
at 17.
wouldn't even be, surprised. And then when I found out that I was pregnant, to me, a baby, I couldn't have a baby. That just stood in the way of me getting high.
Wow.
That's how cold-hearted I had become from the drugs. I didn't have any feelings anymore because I had spent years not feeling. So I went through and had the abortion. And I can still, I'm 36 today, and as long ago as that was, it still brings me to tears because I didn't realize the trauma that abortion would cause. And I regret it every day. And I know a lot of women that go through that have had several abortions, and it really impacts.
That's one of the reasons why I said what I said in the front of this. I'm a college professor. I see young men and young women on a constant basis go through these kinds of things, along with the things that, as a young woman, I went through. But to see it every day, all the time, I know exactly what you're talking about. I get it. Now, the question is, outside of Christ Jesus, there isn't anything there's no system that can stop this. It takes a supernatural somebody loving on you in a way that, like you said, prayer.
The love of God.
That you can see and feel the love of God. It's not something that anybody can manufacture. You've got to, at your deepest, hardest point, be able to feel it. And now you are someone that can give testimony of that kind of love, but also the testimony of the kind of pain that you went through before you got there.
Absolutely. I always felt like I was trash, a piece of trash. I went from there. I've been, anytime you're in addiction, I've been beaten, raped. At one time, I was actually raped by a police officer.
Wow.
That held me captive in his police car overnight. And he told me, who's going to believe you? And I thought, who is going to believe me?
Yeah, you
Who's
believed
going to believe a junkie over a police officer?
Yeah.
And that just increased my shame, and trauma. And I just got myself mixed up in these horrible situations that I can't even begin to explain. But you're absolutely right, the prayer. And a lot of times, I thought I believed in God just because of my grandfather, but I really didn't. I just didn't want to go to hell.
And to me, that's enough to get someone straight enough.
It is.
To say, okay, what do I do not to go there? Because I hear that's really bad.
Yeah, and I didn't want to go there. I mean, I thought I was, a pretty good person, which I wasn't.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I don't want to go there, but it wasn't until, I cried out to God out of fear of dying, because I was in a situation where I didn't know if I was going to make it through the night. I had ended up in Nebraska in the middle of a drug cartel, and this is just somebody who wanted to catch a buzz. And I had ended up in this chaotic, crazy situation way above my head, like somehow ended up here. Didn't know if I was going to make it through the night. And I called out to God, and I called that person, like you said, what do parents do?
Right.
Well, there was one person in my life that never gave up on me. It didn't matter how I looked. My grandfather never gave up hope on me. He said, she's going to be somebody one day. And they said, no, she's not. She's hopeless. She's never going to turn her life around. He said, you don't know her, and you don't know what she's going to do for the kingdom. And so he planted those seeds. So when I needed somebody to call, when I thought I was going to die, that's who I called. And he answered the phone. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. And I got down in that hotel room, and I told him I didn't know if I was going to make it. And I said, I want to give my heart to Jesus. Out of fear, like you said, he'll take you as you are.
He'll take you where you are.
Right.
He does not care. There is nothing that God can't wash away with his loving kindness and tender mercies. But first, we have to fall to our knees and give ourselves to him.
And cry out to him.
And cry out to him.
And just that humble surrender. And that's where he took me as I was that night. And I felt for the first time, he delivered me out of this situation that seemed impossible. For the first time, I felt the peace that surpasses all understanding. You know, I saw evil before I didn't even see evil. I saw, you know, I didn't even notice the sky before, and then I could see the blue sky. Everything was illuminated. You know, there was color in my life, and I thought, oh my God, no matter what happens, I have you with me. You know, and I was shortly after that encounter with God, because I knew that he loved me, that he could love me. I felt so unlovable. And I walked with him for a few months, but unfortunately, I actually turned back to the drugs not too long after that. People ask me, you know, well, you must have not have been saved.
No, that's so not true.
You're right, it's not true.
That's so not true.
I didn't know any other way to live. You know, by this time I had been using 8, maybe 10 years. If I was happy, I used. If I was sad, I used. And everything I did,
How old were you then?
I think at this point, I want to try to be exact, 21 or 22.
So almost 10 years of your life.
Well, I kept going a few more years after
Wow.
my encounter with the Lord, because I didn't know any other way to live.
Right. So there was no one discipling you.
I had no discipleship.
So those folks who were saying she's going to end up where she began, which was a mess.
They were mad at me.
They were mad at you, but they weren't willing to disciple you.
Right, and the Lord had actually sent me, leading up to my salvation experience, the Lord had actually sent me a lady that I call my angel that would minister the gospel to me. But up until that point, nobody had, other than, you know, my grandparents
Right.
and my family trying to talk sense into me. But I went back out there for a few more years. But here's the difference. When you know the Lord and you've encountered him and you try to go back out there, it's not going to be the same.
Doesn't taste the same.
You're going to be miserable.
Yes.
You know, I was an addict that would get high with everybody and read their Bible to them.
Yeah.
You know, the
Wow.
only thing that would give me peace was to watch TBN.
Yeah.
Or, you know, Christian radio. I would listen to preaching. I'd be up for days. But I had to have that word. I didn't know why. I just knew some way, somehow God was going to deliver me, and I didn't know how that he was going to do it. And I went on for a few more years. I picked up about 12 felonies in trafficking morphine.
Wow.
When I was pregnant with my daughter. You
And
know.
how did, I only have a couple of minutes left,
Okay.
but how did you get to that place where you were done, and you knew that, okay, I'm finished with all this?
I know that people were praying over me at this point, and I was in a house, and I had picked up some Christian lingo along the way, and I was really terrified. And I was in a house with somebody who was really heavily involved with the occult. And I didn't tell him, but I began to pray over myself. And I didn't say anything to him while I was praying over myself, but I prayed the armor of God, because I had picked it up, the helmet of salvation, the shoes of readiness on my feet to announce the gospel of peace. I went through the whole thing. Without saying anything, he turned and looked at me and he said, "You have his shield up, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And the Lord told me what he would do if you touched his anointed one. And I don't even talk like that. You know what I'm saying? Like the Holy Spirit
was just flowing out of you. You know,
Just flowing
you're
out of me.
listening. You're listening.
A man that had not cried in 40 years began to cry
Wow.
for about 2 days. And I said out of my mouth, I said, "You know, I'm leaving today." I said, "I'm going to serve Jesus, and I'm never going to come back. You'll never see me again." And that was 11 years ago. And I walked out of that house, and I never looked back. My friend had been trying to get me to go to Teen Challenge. And I was like, "What's that, you know, for teens?" You know, I was like, "No." But I went to my grandfather's house, and he had a library. And I pulled out a book, and I read it, and it was Crossing the Switchblade. Well, I did not know when I got at the end of it that the founder, you know, is the founder of Teen Challenge, you know,
Yes.
and I heard the Holy Spirit say, "This is where I want you to go to be healed." Because I had salvation, I had encountered God, but I needed to be healed. I needed to get rid of all that unforgiveness, you know, and that's what started my journey with him.
This is where it gets good, where you forgive yourself because he has already done it. We'll be back. We love you. Thank you.